Hello and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Harith bin Aimiros. I'm from Oil and Gas Engineering EH243 from Faculty of School of Chemical Engineering. Today I will be presenting about my final year project CGE 693 title of Hazard Identification and Risk Analysis at Oil and Gas Laboratories using HIRAO methodology. What is HIRAO? HIRAO stands for Hazard Identification, Risk Assessment and Opportunity. For the introduction of my research project topic, accident could happen anytime at Oil and Gas Laboratory in School of Chemical Engineering, UiTM Shah Alam. Hence, hazard identification and risk assessment must be executed to mitigate the risk coming from the activities, the equipment, and all the elements in the premise of Oil and Gas Laboratory. And lastly, the improvement on hazard identification and risk assessment using opportunity assessment with transition of Occupational Safety and Health Standard OSAS 18001 to Occupational Safety and Health Standard 4500 ISO 45001 in 2018. What is the objective of my research project? The objective is to perform hazard identification and risk assessment of all activities in Oil and Gas Laboratory in School of Chemical Engineering, University Technology, Shah Alam. Next, to propose and establish preventive and corrective methods and measures that are able to control and eliminate risk. And last but not least, to recommend the opportunities to improve the overall safety and health management system of School of Chemical Engineering, University Technology, Mara. What is the problem statement of my final year project topic? First, to match with the growing of technology used for oil and gas research, hazard identification and risk assessment must be implemented to mitigate the risk. Next, as a recipient of the Occupational Safety and Health Standard ISO 45001 in 2018, it is the requirement to use HIRAO instead of HIRAO, stand for Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment and Risk Control for the Occupational Safety and Health Management System. The scope of this research is exclusively on the Oil and Gas Laboratory in School of Chemical Engineering, UiTM Shah Alam. The assessment is conducted using the equipment, the list of the equipment, the activities, and the condition of the premise in the Oil and Gas Laboratory in School of Chemical Engineering, UiTM Shah Alam. And last but not least, this work will consider the existing organizational chart of School of Chemical Engineering in 2020 until 2021 and procedures involved in the oil and gas laboratory, which include COVID-19 pandemic situation. Not to forget, I want to thank my supervisor, Madam Siti Rafidah binti Rashid, for her continuous support, advice, and guidance for completing my research project. Next, I want to thank my friends and colleagues for their continuous support throughout this semester in the process of completion of my final year project for semester 8. And last but not least, I want to thank my lovely parents for their undying support throughout my educational journey in completing my degree in chemical oil and gas engineering. This is the list of references that I will be using for my hazard identification and risk analysis at Oil and Gas Laboratory using HIRAO methodology. Next, we will be moving on to the methodology of this research project. What is methodology? The methodology is a specific procedures or technique used to identify, select, process and analyze information about this topic, which is the hazard identification and risk analysis at oil and gas laboratories using HIRAO methodology. Okay, next, we will be moving on. What methodology conclude in the HIRAO methodology? First is planning. As the recipient of the Occupational Safety and Health Standard of ISO 45001 in 2018, it is a requirement to plan a safety management system by implementing hazard identification and risk assessment on the element in the premise. This is the content of Act 6 in the Occupational Safety and Health ISO 45001 in 2018. In the planning, include 3 steps, which is first the hazard identification, next is risk assessment, and last but not least, the opportunity assessment. Okay, first, I will be explaining about the hazard identification. For the hazard identification, it is a requirement to state either the work activity is routine and non-routine or emergency. The hazard types example that can be identified from the work activity can be separated into 3 categories, which is agent, as example, corrosive, toxic, mutagenic, biological, or hazard. Condition, hot surface, high pressure, low pressure, uneven surface. And last but not least, activity, heating the chemical, lifting, transportation of hazardous material, and handling waste. Next, I will be explaining about the risk assessment. What is risk assessment? Risk is a quantitative measurement to analyze and evaluate the hazard as a situation of the work activity, as I mentioned before. There are 2 elements in calculating the risk. First is the likelihood of hazard. Second, as severity of hazard. The scale of likelihood of hazard consists from the number of 1 to 5, and then the number will be multiplied to get the number of risk. After the multiplication of the number of likelihood and severity to get the number of risk, the risk level can be identified using the risk level metric index, which show that for low, risk level is 1 to 2, the medium is 3 to 6, the high risk level is 7 to 12, and last but not least, extreme, which is higher than 12. Thus, for the opportunity assessment in HIRAO form construction process involving implementation of risk control, either existing control or recommended control. Hence, opportunity assessment can be divided into aspects. First is risk control, and second, opportunity assessment in overall improvement of safety and health management system in the premise. Hence, from using all the methodology for this research project, the result can be obtained. Result can be obtained using the methodology listed for hazard identification and risk analysis using HIRAO methodology at oil and gas laboratories at University Technology Mara. In School of Chemical Engineering, University Technology Mara Shah Alam, there are 3 lists of oil and gas teaching laboratories. First, gas engineering. Second, geology and drilling laboratory. And last but not least, the reservoir engineering laboratories. As for the result of the HIRAO documentation, the HIRAO form must be filled by the safety officer, but in my case, I will be conducting the HIRAO documentation process. Okay, first, on the top of the HIRAO form table is the information of the location, the person in charge, the date of the documentation conducted. As example, from the top of the HIRAO form table is the name of the company, which is next the location of where the HIRAO documentation process conducted, who the HIRAO documentation approved by. Next, who is conducting the HIRAO documentation process. For this example, is me as a student conducting the HIRAO documentation based on the process involved in the geology and drilling laboratory. Okay, we will be moving on to the element in the HIRAO documentation process. For the HIRAO documentation process, there are 3 elements associated with the HIRAO documentation process. The first element is hazard identification. Second is the risk assessment, and last but not least, the opportunity assessment. Okay, I will show how the HIRAO documentation process occurs. First, the work activity are listed. As for this example, is a sudden electrical blackout happened in the geology and drilling laboratory. The sudden electrical blackout can be considered as emergency because it is a non-routine, neither routine activity in the premise. Hence, the emergency box is ticked. Next, the hazard type is identified based on the work activity, which is a sudden electrical blackout. Hence, the condition is the condition of hazard, which is the immediate stoppage in current activity and equipment. After completing the filling form of the hazard identification space, will we be moving on to the risk assessment process. Since the sudden electrical blackout is an emergency, the likelihood number of this activity is 1. Next, the number of the severity from this activity or the element, which is 3. Hence, to get the number of the risk, the multiplication of the number of the likelihood and the severity, the risk number of 3 with the risk level identification from the risk metric can be identified, which is medium level of the risk level. Next, we will be moving on to the opportunity assessment documentation filling form. Opportunity assessment consists of 2 aspects. First, the existing and recommended control measures. Next, the opportunity to improve the overall equipment or the element regarding the work activity involved. The existing and recommended control measure, which is individual equipped with PPE handling the equipment and materials to prevent potential cuts, spill of chemical or hot fluid. All personnel gather in assembly point for COVID-19 spreading prevention. Personnel must maintain social distancing with one another. Make sure the equipment is switched off and put aside before the power is backed up. Hence, for the opportunity assessment to improve the overall safety and health management system regarding the work activity, the implementation of backup power generator can be made in case of blackout. The equipment in the premise comes with safety feature when sudden electrical cut occurs. Safety and health guideline provided for specific situation for personnel in the premise. And last but not least, the emergency light installed in the premise. After the HIRAO documentation process filling form is completed, the form then is signed and reviewed by the person in charge. Hence, the record of the HIRAO documentation can be made for future reference and next update. As a conclusion of the result from the HIRAO methodology, consideration of COVID-19 SOP in the HIRAO documentation is important to prevent COVID-19 spreading between the personnel in the premise, to obligate the regulation by the World Health Organization and Kementerian Kesihatan Malaysia. And last but not least, HIRAO is a requirement for the recipient for occupational safety and health ISO 45001-2018 standard. Hence, last but not least, for the recommendation for my final year project, a site visit for each teaching laboratory is recommended to increase the understanding of all elements in the premise. And last but not least, the collaboration with the safety officer on implementation of HIRAO documentation in the premise. That's all for me for my final year project presentation. Any question can be asked. Thank you.